Hey guys, my name's Nick and I'm a Microsoft 365 Certified Expert Administrator, and I like to create a lot of content surrounding the MSP space. So one, just implementation guidance surrounding Microsoft, and then two, basically how you could tailor it to your customers in this segment. So today I'm going to be going through Teams Voice with Microsoft calling plans, and we're going to be doing a lot of demoing just to show you all the features and functionalities, both from an admin standpoint and then also from an end user standpoint as well too. So this is a basic architecture, and I'll be getting into detail with this. This implementation video is going to be surrounding cloud-only deployments. So direct routing I might do in another video, but that's not part of the scope of this demo today. So during the demo, this is kind of the agenda on a high level. It's going to be very demo heavy. So we're going to be getting into licensing and features that are available today with the calling plans from Microsoft, what licensing looks like, what plans you have to have in order to get the phone lines and get them set up properly. Licensing bundles, I'm just going to show you some brief pricing there and the different options you have from a pricing standpoint to deliver to your customers. Planning your architecture, general guidelines. This is something I put together just to show you the common architecture of cloud attendants, auto attendants, I should say, calling queues, and also kind of the qualifying questions you would want to ask your customer before you roll this out. And then, of course, majority of the video is going to be demoing all the new features and functionalities within the Team Admin Center, and then also showing you what the end user experience looks like as well too. So getting into it here, these are a list of the major features that I put together that currently Teams Calling supports. And I left off some ones just so you can see compared to the industry standard set by companies like RingCentral or 8x8 or 3CX or something like that. Kind of a similar feature set here. The biggest thing in the MSP space that I see as some pretty big gaps is one, the call recording aspect. So that feature doesn't exist today. Multi-tenant management doesn't exist today, so it's single tenant by tenant from an admin standpoint. And then SMS texting isn't there yet, but according to Microsoft, it will be coming soon, along with some SMB voice plans, which I'll be getting into. A lot of things here available for you, though. You can go through the list here or see if there's anything else that you would want to add. But these are the list of features that I felt like were relevant to the space itself. Kind of diving into it here. So we noticed on the first slide there, we have the Teams calling plan as your base level plan. Then you add your phone system for PBX capabilities, and then your domestic calling is your PSTN lines that you acquire from Microsoft. So these are the couple of the different pricing models here, and the feature sets that are available and come with each one of these. I'll be getting into more depth with the packages that you can create. But on a high level, phone system you need to have as a basic prerequisite. It's included with E5, as you see there. But it is your PBX phone system there. So you need that as a basic prerequisite. Audio conferencing gives you a dial out and dial in for your bridges there, so that people can call in outside the organization. And then your calling plan, domestic calling plan, comes with 3,000 minutes per user, and then domestic and international, 3,000 domestic, 600 international minutes that you get with that as well too. So just keep that in mind as we move forward here. These are some of the potential bundles currently. Microsoft is coming out with SMB voice, which is going to basically bundle these things together. I don't think there's going to be a difference in price. So I think that we're still going to be looking at, if you look at phone system, domestic calling, and audio conferencing here, it's still going to be around $24 a user per month to get that established. Up until recently, this was only available with the enterprise level SKUs, so they called it enterprise voice, and you had to have the E1 plan to be able to bundle those on. but now you can bundle it on even with Business Premium. So that's going to be your cheapest option just because of the base plan being $12.50, with the ability to tack those on. But you can also do it with the new M365 business plan, and major benefit there is what all features you get with M365 business. So things like Intune and conditional access and DLP features and things of that nature that don't come part of that package with Business Premium. Can still bundle it with the enterprise level plans. You have your E1 here, which is only $8 a seat, so more of a cheaper option if you're looking for that. But this is still having you have to bundle on the phone system and domestic calling. With E5, again, comes with phone systems, so we don't have to worry about that, but the base level plan is $35 a month. E3, $20 a seat, again, just like M365 Business. So I would say unless you are capped at a 300 user amount, which is the cap for the M365 Business, then I would 100% go with the business plan over this, just because the feature set is a little bit wider with the new M365 plan. And lastly here, I just want to lightly touch on communication credits. This is something where if you do just buy the domestic calling plan, or if you exceed your minutes allocated per month, you're basically putting a credit in there for anything over the allocated minutes, or if they're dialing out to an international line or toll-free numbers, or anything of that nature. So you can put a credit card on file, and you can allocate $50 into it, and it'll pull from that pool of money there in your tenant itself. So just keep that in mind. So when we think about the architecture and we think about the broad level before we start getting into the implementation, this is kind of the flow that I like to recommend, just so that you don't duplicate any efforts or you overlap in some regards from creating things that you're going back and forth between two different portals, and it's taking a little bit more time. So we'll be going through all of these together through the demo, but just keep this in mind, and I'll be referencing it later in the call as well too. So this is some sample architecture. This is in Cloud AutoAttend, and we'll be creating one on the call here. But you have your call queues, which is like you would see here. This is like billing with a couple of agents in billing, lawyers with the 3 lawyers, and things of that nature. And we'll be setting all of those up, but I just also wanted to give you like a high level architecture just so you can see that before we actually get into the demo account and run through that together. So some exercises you can run, I recommend you run with your client before you go ahead and implement this. If you don't already know it, is one, get a list of everybody who takes inbound calls. And usually there's a receptionist or somebody at the office, and you could ask them to record, during the day, a list of the calls they have and who they're transferring them to, just so you can get a better idea of the common volume. And that's kind of how you're going to want to route the calls from the tree standpoint when we set up AutoAttend. So like in this one, since scheduling, rescheduling, canceling, it's getting 45 calls, the initial line should go to the receptionist, aka the operator in this case. And then secondly, line 1, when you're thinking about the prompts for the calls to go to, should be billing. And that will go to a call queue, which is going to be Jacob or Laura in billing to go ahead and do that. So, this is something that you can do as an exercise before, if you're not as familiar with the inner workings of their call line to begin with. You may already have that though, and don't have to ask any questions. Some other ones that you can consider here: are there any special considerations of any job function, as in business hours, as in somebody that basically needs to transfer to somebody else, delegation, or anything of that nature that's going on right now currently. What are the business hours, non-business hours, and holidays the company operates in? You'll need that when you're creating the AutoAttend. And then lastly, for each of the job functions in the office, what issues do they handle for customers? So like the example says here, it's possible that Julie, the receptionist, can answer many questions that you might have assumed should be routed to the billing department, or Valerie of the office manager. So there's a couple different routes, you can go there, but just keep those things in mind when you're setting things up. And honestly, you can troubleshoot this and trial it out with them, and they can come back to you with modifications if there's something that they feel like would be more appropriate, or you're seeing some of the lines being on hold for longer. You can kind of tweak it a little bit after the fact, which I'll show you in the demo as well. General guidelines here, I'm not going to get into too much detail. So just a couple of major things here to do. Good idea to have initial greetings for the calls taken outside of business hours, holidays, or weekends. You'll see that we have the ability to import audio files and things of that nature. If you're using multilingual prompts, put the secondary languages or languages at the end of the first set of options. So this is something that's not going to probably come up too often, but if you do have some clients who are using multiple languages, you'll need to create the separate set of nested attendants for the second language, like it says there. Frequently used options as early as possible. I touched on that before. Take a few extra minutes to flowchart the options you want to create. And you can kind of whiteboard this or use post-it notes before you fully implement it. Recommend doing that with the client so you guys can sit down together and flesh that out and then get consensus that it all makes sense. And then have the menu repeat if nothing is selected. If there isn't a selection, transfer the call to a live operator rather than having the call disconnect. So the settings there, you can choose to have the ability to direct to a live person at any time if that's something that you do want. And it could be helpful if that person, as in a receptionist or a secretary or something, is available to take calls and somebody doesn't want to wait through the whole call queue to see who they need to be routed to. Do not create a nested auto attendant with more than 5 choices. If you do, you'll likely confuse your callers and force them to repeat the menu. Just high-level guideline there. Use reserve menu option numbers or keys as menu option. So this is something where we don't want to put anything on the top where they have to type in multiple keys to get routed somewhere else. So we'll be getting into this right now. I just wanted to show you high level. Like I said, most of this is going to be demo heavy though, so I want you guys to see firsthand from an administrator standpoint and end user standpoint what that looks like. So back in the Teams dashboard here, like I had mentioned earlier, and I'll keep referencing this right here. So we want to acquire licenses and assign them to users. So the easiest way to do that, again, you've had to have picked your architecture. In this particular account, I have M365 Business set up, and I've ordered phone system and domestic calling. So I have those licenses active here. So what I'll need to do is I'll need to assign them to all of my voice users. So one, you see right here, I can go into licenses and apps, and I'll need to add common area phone. This is phone system, aka, and I'll need to add the domestic calling plan on top of my base level plan here as well too to my users, and I'll need to get that set up. The second thing that we need to consider is any groups that you need to create for security groups that will apply to our call queues. And then secondly, when we create an auto attendant, you could potentially scope it to certain subsets of users rather than applying it to all users. And the case where that would come up is if you have one department, like the ops team, that has different business hours than, let's say, the support team, and you need to create 2 separate auto attendants. In that case, you would assign one group to the ops auto attendant and the other one to the support auto attendant. So in this particular case, you can just go into groups, and this is an example. I created a billing security group just so that this is going to be associated with my call queue for my billing agents that I will assign, that you guys will see here shortly. So again, we want to create all the necessary groups. If you got a billing queue, if you got a support queue, if you got a sales queue, go ahead and add them here. And if it's more than one person, you'll need to add them in here. And I recommend just doing security group for simplicity here. So then you don't create a 365 group with an associated Teams channel potentially or anything like that. You could if you feel like that's beneficial, but if you want to keep it simplistic, simply just go with the security group there. So after we've done that, we need to go ahead and assign phone numbers to our users or port them over from another provider. So I'm going to show you both of those. Underneath here, under the admin centers, you can click on the Teams admin center and it'll open up your dashboard here in a new tab, and we can do most admin functionalities from this tab, but two things that haven't been moved over from the legacy Skype for Business admin center is one, assigning phone numbers to users, and then two, porting numbers over. So these next two features that I'm going to show you are actually in the old legacy portal for the time being. Microsoft's going to finish moving those over into this portal pretty soon. But at the time of this recording, they are still in the legacy portal. So if I click on this, it'll open up the old Skype for Business admin center. And if I've just assigned my licenses to users, this may take about an hour to propagate in some cases, but I've already had this assigned. So you can go over to the voice section here. And in the voice section, you can see our phone numbers that we've already acquired in the past here. And if I go over to my voice users, I would see anybody listed here with a phone system license and domestic calling plan. Need to refresh here maybe. Oops, let's try that again. Go back to voice users, and let it load up here. So if you hadn't had a number assigned, there would be nothing here, but it shows anybody with the correct licensing applied, so you could potentially just license them from here. The first thing you'll have to do though is add an emergency location. So you can just click into this tab, click on the plus icon to add it. Because you won't be able to assign any phone numbers until you add this emergency location, and that's typically the business address is fine for most customers. So when we're thinking about phone numbers, again, we can acquire them here, or we can create a port order to port them over from another provider like RingCentral, for instance. So in the port order section, it's giving you some recommendations here. There's an entire FAQ built around this for you guys to reference if you need to, an entire setup guide straight from Microsoft as well. But when you click on I'm ready to create a port order, it's basically giving you, some general guidelines before you get started. The biggest things with this, you can do a full or partial port from your current provider. The biggest mistakes people make are not putting in the correct account number or address as it's listed correctly from the current provider here. But it'll take you through this wizard, and it's pretty straightforward from the standpoint of you having to put in your service address and account number and billing telephone number and things of that nature. You define the numbers of which you're going to port over, define what date you want them transferred or to initiate the transfer. Generally that takes roughly like 7 business days, but I've seen it happen in 3 in some cases, but Microsoft says it can take up to 30 business days depending on the provider. So just realize that before you create this, have some leeway from the standpoint of a hard cutover if you are moving off a provider or your contract is coming up to expiration. Make sure it's at least 30 days prior to expiration that you actually initiate this port order. Have some planning in mind around that. Letter of authorization is digital, but it's the person listed on the account there that'll submit that, and you'll finish it. You'll get an email from Microsoft on a daily basis, basically referencing what state it's at in the process, and you can track that by the ticket number that you get as well too. So that's, basically creating a port number, port order to port over existing numbers. The other way though, if you don't have that, you're just doing a straight Microsoft deployment, you never had other phone numbers outside, you can go ahead and come in here and click on the plus sign, and either you're adding new user numbers or new service numbers. So service numbers, like it says here, you're going to assign to conference bridges, like the audio conferencing bridges, or the resource accounts that are going to be associated with your call queue or associated with your auto attendant. So we're going to need a few service numbers even from the most basic deployments in here if you have to route to certain call queues or anything of that nature. When you're going to add them though, you click on new user numbers, and this will bring up a new page. You basically just defined your state and region, wherever you're at right now, and it'll tell you how many numbers you can acquire based off of the number of licenses you have. The translation you can reference in this article. I'll link it in there, but it's basically telling you how many phone numbers you can get, both service phone numbers and user phone numbers, based off of how many licenses you have within the portal itself. So this is good to reference as well for that piece. In this case, I'm just going to say I want 2 new user numbers, and I can click on add. It's reaching out to a telco provider there to acquire them, so it pulls them down here with the 720 area code, and I can click on acquire numbers, and this really just takes a few minutes, and that's all done. It'll take me back to my page here, and you can see I've added a couple of user numbers here. Number type is always what you want to reference for service or user number. And in here, I could technically click on that and click on assign, and sometimes you'll get this message because you just added them there and they need some time to propagate. Let me see if I can get one to pull up here. So this is one that we already had in there, which is why we didn't get that error message. But you can just search for the voice user and add your emergency location there. Somebody who's licensed again with phone system and domestic calling, and the base level plan is somebody you can assign it to. In this case, I've only got that one user already assigned, so I'm not going to do that, but I just wanted to show you guys what that looks like from the standpoint of assigning the phone numbers to users. In addition to this, I recognize the scenario where you may have hundreds of users that you just uploaded in hundreds of numbers, and you basically want to do more so a bulk deployment, or you want to both acquire numbers for the number of people you have within there, and also assign phone numbers to users at the same time in bulk. So with that, I did create a PowerShell script here. I'll link this up. It's in GitHub. But basically, there's a couple of variables you'll have to put in depending on your region. But I do the read host here so that you are prompted to enter those in. And this will run through, and 1, it'll acquire new numbers based off of that region. And then 2, it will assign those numbers to licensed voice users that you define in a comma separated value up at the top there. So this is something that will help with that bulk deployment if you ever run into that. So next thing there, again, we want to reference this. So we license our users, we acquired some phone numbers. We created the groups, so back again within here, if you need to, again, think about your architecture and create any groups, you'll need to do that there. But the next thing that we need to do is create some resource accounts. And think of these again, you'll need a resource account for your auto attendant. So like when I call in, that's the person that says, hey, thanks for calling XYZ company. Listen to the options below here. And that's going to be the main line usually that people call into. And then secondly, your call queues have to have individual numbers as well too. So our call queue of billing has to have a resource account associated with it. Up until about a few months ago, resource accounts had to be licensed with a paid subscription like regular users, so phone system and domestic calling. Microsoft made some changes recently, and they have a SKU called Phone System Virtual User now, and with that, it's a $0 SKU, and you can assign it to these resource groups or resource accounts, I should say, at no additional cost. So the basic thing you'll want to do here first is under the org-wide settings in the Teams Admin Center, you'll want to go under the resource accounts section. And here you see I already added a couple of examples so that I can show you just a reference here. But this is my auto attendant resource group or resource account, and this is my call queue resource account. And I've already assigned some numbers there to them. But if you want to add a new one here, you click on add, and you can define, whatever this is, and you can just say, hey, support, maybe, and then at your domain.com, wherever you want there. And then under the account type, it's either auto attendant or it's a call queue. So again, you usually in a most simplistic deployment going to have one auto attendant that's got to route to multiple call queues with different agents in different departments. So if you go back over to the admin portal here, we can go under the billing section. We can go under purchase services, and we're going to be looking for that phone system virtual user. Again, that's a $0 SKU. Can't search for it here, it won't come up. You actually have to go down, click on add-ons, and in the add-ons you'll see phone system virtual user right here. So if you click on this, it'll take you through a checkout process. You just have to have a card on file, but it is again $0, so you don't have to add anything to that. You'll want to add as many as you want here, really no limit. Again, you're not paying for these, so I would go ahead and get a lot, depending on your architecture, just so you don't have to run through this process again. I've already acquired these though, so I'm going to go back to the admin center and take note, if you do plan on forwarding to an external number for one of these resource accounts, they do have to be a fully paid licensed user, and that's the one caveat, so keep that in mind. If they are a paid licensed user, they'll need that. But then what you would do here is you would go up to one of your accounts that you created as a resource account, you would click on it, you would go under licensing and apps, and you assign the phone system virtual user license to that resource account. Take note, it takes about 5 minutes before these will even show up here for you to be able to assign. So if you're not seeing it right away, just wait a couple minutes and it'll be available for you to assign there. So the next thing, after we've gotten all of our queues assigned there, we do need to go ahead and assign phone numbers to them. And these are those service lines that we acquired or can acquire from the phone number section here too. So I have a couple that are unassigned that are activated. So to do that, if this wasn't already assigned, I can click on the assign unassigned phone number here, and this will pull up and you'll start to see the settings there. The phone number type, if you procured, online licensing, that's what you'll want to select here. Toll free is a little different, and then on premises, that's if you had that direct routing set up for hybrid, which is outside the scope of this implementation. So you'll want to select online. The biggest thing with the phone number is that you need to type in the +1 or whatever area code you're in for your country first, or it's going to say no results are found if you just try to start typing 720. So keep that in mind. If you don't see these available yet for you to acquire, it just means that you need to wait a little bit more time for that to propagate after you assign the virtual user license to the resource account. So I generally like to assign it, give it about 10 minutes, come in here then and see if I can go ahead and find that number and save it here. I've seen some cases, it's still a little bit buggy sometimes, where it just will give you some errors and it says it can't do this action. So either one, you could wait a little bit longer, or you can go ahead and just blow away the resource account and create a new one. I've seen that work just fine as well too. So a few buggy errors, or sometimes even I've seen you'll get an error message here and then it still will assign the phone number and you're fine, and it works just fine. So don't like that a lot. Still a little bit buggy in that regard, but that's how you go about going in and assigning these phone numbers to individual resource accounts after you're done there. So some of the next things, again, for referencing our chart here. So we have added our resource account and we want to go ahead and create a call queue, because when we create the auto attendant, we're going to reference the call queues that we want to direct the calls to based off of typing in a certain number or something like that. So let's go ahead and go under voice and we'll go under the call queues section. I've already got one mocked up here, but I just wanted to show you that if you want to click on add, you will add a new one. I'm going to look at these settings here. So this is my billing call queue, and this is my resource account assigned to that. So it's got its own individual phone number that will route to it. For the greeting, you can choose to have a greeting or no greeting. So audio file if you want to record something and upload it, or no greeting if you just want it to start routing accordingly to agents. So music on hold, you can play default music, or you can have your own custom audio file which is associated with that. Call agents, this is where you can come in, and we created those groups originally, so you can search for the distribution list or the group there. You can click on add and you can click on add again, and that will load up there, and that'll be encompassing all of your agents in that group. If you only have one person in the billing department, you could still add the distro group and add that one person as part of the group. And then if the company expands, then you don't have to worry about recreating the architecture. So I do recommend, even if it's one person, keeping them as a group, unless you anticipate the department is not going to grow at all. So routing method, attendant routing is basically going to route to everybody at the same time. Basically it's got to ring everybody at the same time, all the agents, and whoever picks it up is the one who answers the call. Serial routing is defined by the groups here. If you had more groups or call agents, again, says incoming calls will ring call agents one by one, starting from the beginning of the call agent list. So it's going to start with the billing department here and basically ring one of those members at a time. Round robin is equally transferred. So let's say you have 100 calls in a day and you have 10 people in the billing group. Each of those person would take 10 calls during the day. Same number of calls. So a couple of different options there. I think a lot of the time you are going to do round robin, but you could also do attendant routing if you want everybody to get the call at the same time, just so everybody's being alerted. Agents can opt out of taking calls. I recommend that you don't turn this off, but some use cases you may. Agent alert time. This is how long it's going to ring before it moves on in the case of round robin or serial routing, or collectively across everybody if you have attendant routing. Overflow handling. This is, maximum calls in the queue are reached. Any additional calls will be disconnected or redirected. So this is where you can choose the maximum number of calls. This is obviously going to vary by the business and how many inbound calls are actually coming, to appropriately select a good number there so that people aren't waiting forever on hold, or they're just waiting and being disconnected. So you could redirect it to a person within the organization. Maybe that's somebody who takes overflow lines to that, or you could send it to another resource account, and this could be something like the backflow for billing, which may be the support team, or something of that nature. So you have the ability to customize that. Maybe best though, if there's not too much volume in the calls, just to disconnect after that. Call timeout handling. This is if the call is answered within the maximum wait time, it will be disconnected. And I would minimize this. This is what they put in by default, but I don't feel like that's a best practice. Is good to put it at 20 minutes to start. And the maximum wait time, I put a little bit lower, and redirect potentially to another person or another application, whether this may be the operator too if you want, but you may have an overflow line as well. So pretty straightforward, but you can customize some settings, and I can click save on here, and this will save anything. And again, a little shaky as far as the edits there. So I've already got that set up. I just wanted to show you guys what that looks like in this particular call queue. The next thing you would want to do after you have all these resource accounts defined is go ahead and set up your auto attendant. So in this, I've already created one again, but we're going to go through each part of the wizard so that you guys can see that as well. So you can call the auto attendant whatever you want, general line or whatever it may be. And again, you're assigning that resource account with the phone number. That's the main line that calls into the organization. You define your time zone, you define your language, and then you have your operator here. So it could be none, and you can leave it blank. But this is where I was mentioning before, if you do define an operator, somebody could say operator or press 0 at any time during the prompts, and they'll be redirected to either that person, if you define a person within the organization. And if they do that, you can just start typing in their display name, and it'll look for whoever has that, in that case me, but you can type in any licensed voice user there, or you could redirect it to a voice app, which is again another resource account or call auto attendant. But in some cases you can choose just a lot of cases you want to just do none if you don't want it to redirect anytime. Voice inputs, you can turn this on. This is dial by voice capabilities. So there's dial by directory and there's dial by voice. And if you put this in place, they could basically route out of the call queues and everything and go straight to an individual user instead of having to go through the whole calling tree. Next here, we're just defining our business hours, and this is something where I'm going to do a test here in a second to show you what this sounds like. So I do want to define some business hours for Saturday, because today's Saturday, and I'll click next. And so business hours, calling settings, again, you can choose no greeting, you can attach an audio file, or you could just type in a greeting, and I did so here, and this will read based off of the automated prompt that'll come through, which I'll play for you guys after we get this done. And then the actions, you can either redirect the call to somebody else, or you can play menu options, and this is where you define what those options are. So 1 for billing, 2 for support, 3 for accounting, operator press 0 if we added that's the case. So whenever we set that up, then we go ahead and assign the dial keys, and this is where you can add your call queues for billing, for support, or if they're individual people within the organization, maybe billing is just one person, or maybe support's just one person, you can define a person within the organization and add that person there. So dial by name then is turned on. So in case I just want to skip all this, and I can say just Nick Ross, and that'll connect me with him rather than having to sit through the automated options there. Next here is after hours call settings. So you have your greeting, again, pretty straightforward there. This is saying, hey, you've reached Dunder Mifflin. Our normal business hours are 9 to 5. Please call back then. You could reroute them to person within the organization or voice app. But again, if you choose to redirect to a voicemail, that does have to be a paid licensed user. And that is, something where you can't use the virtual license in the account. Otherwise, you can just choose to disconnect and that will go offline. Holidays, these are pretty straightforward. You can add a holiday. You can call it, 4th of July. And we'll click on add because we don't have any. July 4th, we'll click on the dates for the start time and end time. And we'll say it's July 4th. And end time is July 5th. And you can find any times and everything like that. But I'm just going to move forward there. So we created this item, holiday here. We can select it from the drop down, July 4th. And again, you can choose to type in a greeting and choose what actions that you're going to take for that. In this case, I could just say, we are closed due to the holiday. We will be back in the office July 5th at 9 a.m. Eastern time. And then disconnect. So that works, and I can add as many holidays as I want. So that one's added, and I could do the rest of my holidays. And then lastly here, this is where, like I mentioned earlier in the video, you could scope out custom users. So again, if you have two different business hours for two different departments, you may want to assign this auto attendant to individual users within a certain group. In this case though, it's everybody's on the same line though, so I'm going to submit. And I'll let that save. Great. So now I just want to give it a call, just so you guys can see and hear what this sounds like when I dial in. So we're going to call 303-352-2393.
Hello there. Thanks for calling Dunder Mifflin Paper Company. Select 1 for billing, 2 for support, 3 for accounting. If you would like to speak with the operator, press 0.
So that's really what the message sounds like there. And they can go dial through the options and they'll get routed to the appropriate team. But that's, the basis of the auto attendant here. So this, always plan out the architecture is the biggest thing, so that you can get that down. And then again, afterwards you can go in and tweak it if you do find that there's some things that you need to modify, or anything of that nature. So those are the biggest pieces to the Teams calling plans, things like that. So we went over licensing, we went over acquiring phone numbers, we went over call queues, auto attendants. I wanted to quickly run through some of the remaining admin functionalities here, and then touch on end user experience. You guys can see that as well too. So within the call park policies, like you see up top here, this allows the users to park call and acquire a little code which they can send to a Teams group or a distro or something like that, where, in the case of an example where somebody doesn't know the answer to a question and they don't know exactly who could answer that, but they know that this team group or this distro list, somebody in there can pick up the phone and answer it. Or, they don't, it's a round robin like function where You don't want to route it to the same person over and over. You want to put it out there in the group, and whoever's available can then grab the code, enter it in, and pick up the phone to answer the call. So by default, the global wide policies to have this turned off. So nobody has call park policies, and you have to create a custom one if you want to add that. So to do so, you come in here to the add button, and there's not much you can do here. You can just turn it on, and then the rest of these fields are by default set, and you can't change them. So after you create it and save it, you'll have it listed there to create a one called next policy. And to assign it to a user, you can go ahead and go up to Users tab, click on one of your voice users here, and if you scroll down, you'll see underneath policies, you can edit this, and call park policy you would rename. So I've already got it defined as next policy, but you would change it from global to the one that you create and click on apply to save that. And we'll see what that looks like during the end user experience. But after you assign this, it does take 10-15 minutes to propagate before the necessary buttons for call parking will show up for the user. So just keep that in mind. Calling policies, pretty straightforward here. These are if you want to restrict some of the end user settings. By default, these are the ones that are turned on. So they are allowed to forward to external numbers. They're allowed to control their voicemail, what it says. They can add call groups themselves within their own Teams channel, which I'll show you. They can add delegation for inbound and outbound calls, so somebody who's able to pick up on their phone on their behalf, like an EA or a secretary. And then a couple of other settings that are turned off here. So if you wanted to restrict them to not be able to call groups, or not be able to do delegation, or not be able to change their voicemail, you can set these settings here and then go to the users again and apply that policy to them. Some of the ones here that you can do is the caller ID policy. So by default, this is what's set up. Block incoming caller ID, it's turned off. Override the caller ID policy is turned off. And replace the caller ID with the user's number is on by default. The only reason I would say you would want to change this in some use cases is for outbound callers. You may want to replace the user's number with the service number, as in the main line of the company, so that it's universally the same going out, and it's not individual users' numbers. So when external parties get the call, they are receiving the service number of the organization, not an individual number, and it's then recognizable across the board. But otherwise, by default, the user's number is listed there, and then you have anonymous, which it's user discretion, but not likely that's going to be something you put up. Override the caller ID policy. This gives users the ability to override the policy in the fact that they could then make their outbound line either anonymous or a service number. So I usually, you want to keep that off. Block incoming caller ID, that's just going to make their number anonymous outside, and usually don't want to do that either. So if you do create a policy for the service number and you save that, right now, at this current time of the recording, the only way to apply that to users is with PowerShell. So this is going to show you how to do that by connecting to the Exchange Online or the Skype for Business Online commandlets, and then either assigning it to a individual user or a group of users. So keep that in mind. They say in their documentation that it's under this tab, under policies here. But as you see, there's no caller ID policy here. There's only calling policy and then call park. So don't know what they're referencing there, but PowerShell works to do that if you wanted to apply it to one user, a broad group of users, or anything like that. So those are the main things there. I wanted to touch on a couple more things at the user level here before we move outside. Underneath the voice tab here, there's a couple of settings you can configure. You can choose to only allow domestic dial out if you wanted to restrict them so that they couldn't dial out internationally. Maybe a setting you want to enable. Right now, currently, this is not part of the global policy, which I don't understand fully, but that is how you would change it here. Call group pickup, again, you can add people here, you can add a username, and then this will start to route to other users that are part of that group. So it will ring, for 20 seconds at one user, then move to the next. And by default, it's set for in order of the table rows. So as you add people here, this will be the order that it rings them, and this is the interval of which it'll move on to the next person. And then you could also do simultaneous ringing, so it'll ring everybody at once if you wanted to do that as well too. Call delegation, you can set up here. This is like an EA or secretary that can take calls on behalf of the user, and it basically makes and receives calls at the same time, so they can answer the call on behalf of that person. So these are the basic settings here from an admin standpoint that you can configure. The next couple pieces here that I wanted to show you are end user experience. Let me just go into Teams. And I'll let this load up here. We'll select to just use the web app. So I'm logged in with my user who's licensed with the calling plan. And there's a couple of different things that I want to show you in here from their perspective. So everybody by default now has the calls listed here. They won't be assigned a phone number. They won't see this unless they have the calling plan and can then dial out rather than the free internal line they get with their Teams calling plan itself. So with the end user experience, there's a couple of different things that I wanted to show. The first of which is voicemail. By default, once they're licensed, they do get a voicemail set up by default, and it'll just say, hey, Nick Ross is unavailable at this time, please call back, or leave a voicemail message here. And then it does the transcription for you as well. It goes to your Exchange Online mailbox, so you have it all written out and you have that stored as part of your storage with Exchange Online. They can go ahead and set their own custom ringtone or voicemail, I should say, by going into settings here, going into calls, and clicking on the configure voicemail button here. So that's one way they can go about setting that up, and that'll just have them record. So on here they have the ability to add speed dial. They can add calling groups themselves unless you disable that in the policy, in the global policy, and you can choose to do that. And then we have the ability to take part calls if you assign the part calls to the user. And if you click on that, that's where you would paste in the code that somebody else has given you in that case, which I'll show you here in just a second. But basic premise there, I can kind of go ahead and look at the settings again. By default, you can add delegates to your call queue. So this is again an EA or secretary. You can go ahead and set to forward your calls to voicemail, or you could select an external number, and that's how you would forward to an external number. You define it here and you save it, and that'll be listed. So I already did that, and that's why these numbers are listed here. But you could send it to another call group that's created, or you could send it to voicemail if this is an after hours line that you do still want to get voicemails to. You can define different ringtones for the different types of calls that would be coming in, and then you can block calls with no caller ID if you want as well too. So this one, pretty straightforward with a lot of these settings. If you just want to get more restrictive, again, you can take out the ability to block their voicemail, creating a custom voicemail, block them from creating call groups, and block them from creating delegates from their phone line. So now I'm just going to do an example of an inbound call here to this end user. So I get the prompt there and I can pick up the phone, and now I have a line connected here. So a couple of different options. What you can do down below is a couple of different things from the settings pane. You'll see a couple of different options here. Obviously, hold and transfer are pretty straightforward, common ones you would do. If you click on transfer, you can search for somebody within your organization to transfer the call to. And if you select somebody, you can choose to transfer to their voicemail immediately if you wanted to as well. And if I go back to resume, the other things that you can do here is consult, then transfer. So again, if I was going to do Bruce Wayne or Bruce Banner here, I can choose to consult, which will then bring up a small little Teams chat, and I can then talk to them first before I actually send this over. And again, I can choose to send it to their work or their voicemail. So I'll stop consulting and I'll resume. The other thing that we touched on was the park call. So you can click on that, and this is going to put it into a park call, and you have the code up at the top here of which you can copy, and I can then choose to send it to somebody else within the organization, and then they can pick up the phone and pick up and dial out from there. Otherwise, I could simply just drop the call after they've picked it up, and the call is done from there. So pretty straightforward features there that you can do within Teams as an end user, and some from an admin standpoint that you can restrict. But those are the bulk of the features that you'll be using as you roll this out to your customers. I will have the entire guide here I made for you so that you can reference it. So this is basically going through licensing and everything we covered today, just in a written document as well. So you can reference it at a later time. But again, if you do have anything else additional that you want to reach out about, you can email me here, or you can go to my website, and that's where the doc will be available from. Otherwise, please comment below on this video with anything that you think that can be improved, or any questions you have that I didn't answer going through this. Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.